How does a video game tell one of the most impactful love stories of all time? This is a question many gamers asked when The Last of Us first released in 2013. And when its sequel released in 2020, that question was asked yet again. Now, it's a question being asked for the HBO live-action series adaptation. Audiences and critics alike have been enamored since the pilot. For storytelling enthusiasts, the pilot is an exemplar for a first act that keeps that question burning. In this episode of Workshopping Stories Adaptations, we'll be looking at how The Last of Us pilot makes for one of the best first acts we've seen in a live-action video game adaptation. This discussion covers all major plot points of the first episode of The Last of Us, so from here on out, there will be spoilers. The Last of Us has been heralded as one of the most important entries in the history of video games. Many gamers and critics could point to this game when asked, are video games actually art? Its story was just as strong as any novel or film, and it blended harmoniously with its unique gameplay. The game starts off with some exposition and an introduction to the game world and a beloved character, Sarah, played by Hannah Hayes. Our meeting with Sarah and her father Joel, played by Troy Baker, is brief, before we start the gameplay. The game developers at Naughty Dog understood that gamers have expectations for what's to come in a game. And while they made sure to structure their introduction as a gaming tutorial, they also facilitated storytelling. This is where the adaptation from game to screenplay needs to leverage the strengths and purpose of its respective medium. The pilot of the series adaptation lets us walk alongside Sarah, played by Nico Parker. She's allowing us to experience the story world with her. We can relate to her, either from our own childhood memories or perhaps from a guardian's perspective. And as she walks us through the start of the story, we follow her to the veil between worlds. Both sequences, despite differing in time and setup, still demonstrate there's light in the story world. Right now, at the start of both the game and the show, audiences are getting ready to plunge into the story. It's unknown territory. But these lights illuminate what's to come as we begin Act 1. Acts are a fundamental cornerstone of storytelling. Aristotle's three-act structure presents storytellers and audiences with the viewport of how we get from the beginning of a tale to the end. Scholars and storytellers have found other means to support this structure. Their contributions to the study of telling stories has created an overarching shape we can think of as general guidelines or framework. These elements may not always line up perfectly, but they provide a roadmap for how to highlight each turning point in a story that most tales have included. There are different ways to approach each act, and many experts still struggle with the overwhelming second act or how to conclude the third act in a satisfying way. We'll be focusing on the first act. Writers such as Dave Trottier, John Truby, and John Yorke have distilled these structures in ways that provide landmarks for what to expect in a story written as a screenplay. We can use their collective observations that make up a framework for storytelling. Trottier, Truby, and Yorke all make the point that there needs to be purpose to each scene that makes up each sequence, which adds to the larger act, and ultimately the whole story. Overall, we have overlapping components that establish a framework commonly found in stories. Introduction, catalyst, inciting incident, rising action and complications, crisis, showdown, and resolution. Each of these story elements are consistently mentioned by writers and subject matter experts. They reinforce these concepts as how stories maintain theme with clarity. Story structures can be changed, adapted, or even scrambled. But even with complex storytelling, if the storyteller has executed their weaving of a tale effectively, we as their audience should be able to have a reasonable discussion about what we just experienced, due to the inclusion of most, if not all, of these components. With these concepts in mind, we can compare them to the major points and beats within the first episode of The Last of Us. The first major component of a story will be the introduction. Even though the pacing is different between game and show, the pace follows each medium respectfully. The game is respectful of the players who are ready to engage and act out a story for themselves. and the show is respectful of the audience who can take their time as witnesses through the lens of a camera. The Last of Us show adds a new opening scene not found in the game, but it sets the ominous tone of the genre and basic building blocks of knowledge for the story. We know what to expect before our protagonists ever will, and the scene garnered positive reception from both those who know the game and those watching the story for the first time. But this isn't the end of our introduction. The status quo of what we know the story will to be is set as we follow Sarah. We see tremors, small turning points. We're moving seamlessly through exposition in purposeful action and dialogue. There are the obvious moments where the audience knows what's happening and the protagonist won't until it's too late. This perspective is another divergence from the game. Sarah is the video game player's conduit in the introduction, but we're experiencing the realization of what's happening in the turning points at the same time as her. But we don't get the same full day ride along with her like we do in the show. In the show, we see more of Sarah with her dad, played by Pedro Pascal. How their small family shows love in simple but meaningful gestures, playful banter, and comfortable habits. For someone coming into the show without any prior knowledge of the game, they might not realize just how poignant these moments are with Sarah. For those who have played the game, the impact of Sarah's journey isn't diminished. That feeling is what makes her steps through the world that much more trepidatious. Right now, she's the heart of the story, that light we follow through uncertain darkness. The turning points up until the night have compounded anxiety for the helpless audience unable to warn Sarah of what's happening. With nightfall, the pieces come together for Sarah. Here's where we can consider Trottier's suggestion that there can be several smaller inciting incidents in the form of catalysts, those small triggers that are building up to the main turning point of our story. This major turning point will be what pushes our protagonist into the new world of the story. With these small incidents, evidence of the world's changes, Sarah's finally catching up to the audience. Hints at the world changing start to flare up, burning up the edges of the veil that separates the world she knows from that of the unknown, her neighbors, her own father, the city. And then it happens. The catalyst. This catalyst jumps us into a story now through a new perspective of Joel. It's 20 years later. We're fed more information about this new world through brilliant showing, not telling. That Joel is almost a complete shell of a person, and that the world and its new order feels the same as him, a shell. A shell vibrating with unchecked grief, rage, and desperation. Yet perhaps there's some light. We find out that Joel's brother, Tommy, played by Gabriel Luna, Jeffrey Price in the game, is still alive. Joel is willing to leave the relative safety of the quarantine zone in order to find him. And he needs a car battery so he can get to his brother as quickly as possible. This is Joel's goal, the thing most important to him. But something happens. We learn through Tess, played by Anna Torv in the show and Annie Wershing in the game, that the battery is in limbo. A new complication, a new mini-crisis. And as this complication plays out, it meets with a new complication. A guerrilla group's fight with government forces nearly kills Tess. These crises help further define the new rules of this world. We don't know what Tess is to Joel, other than perhaps her muscle, a business partner. But then we see them together. A relaxed, familiar comfort there. So far, two lights. But there's still darkness. And even though it feels like Joel is against everyone, and the world is against Joel, the audience is given a sliver of hope through Ellie, played by Bella Ramsey in the show, and Ashley Johnson in the game. We get scenes bursting with her character. The deeper information comes from her conversation with Marlene, played by Merle Dandridge, leader of the group The Fireflies. It dredges up backstory alongside more questions about Ellie. But this is where those who may be unfamiliar with the game can see how these two seemingly separate storylines will converge. And it does, when Joel's initial goal of getting to his brother is complicated once again when they find the battery. But it's completely useless, another setback for our protagonists. Yet now that same dead battery is how they encounter the fireflies. The intersection is complete when Ellie literally barrels into Joel. Once upon a time, a numb man who felt too much met a young girl with a seemingly impossible gift. We're at our inciting incident. It sets us into a steep incline of action with our protagonists. Marlene convinces Joel and Tess to smuggle Ellie out of the quarantine zone with the promise of a reward that'll set Joel back onto track with finding his brother. The episode could end here, an uncertain and uneasy agreement between jaded, angry child and jaded, angry man. The audience would be sitting with that tight feeling in their chest. Sure, we made it through the first act, but we know that means we're passing the threshold fully into the new, unknown world. Yet the episode continues. There's something off. We're still holding our breath, even through the relative mundanity of watching Ellie interacting with Joel. These scenes at first seem to offer terse dialogue and action, but we're still raw from how we saw Joel and Sarah together. Maybe, as an audience, we can start to hope that the sparks of wariness can shift into something new. All of these moments are leading to something bigger. Perhaps the tension will release once our protagonists have left the quarantine zone. But there's a guard that's ready to shoot them where they stand, blocking them from Tommy, from moving Ellie. Joel acts. It taps into something that maybe he didn't know still lived in him. This show beautifully demonstrates how, even in the darkest of times, we can look to the light. But it's a light found in the most sacred of bonds. Love. However, love is a tricky thing. We can only wait to see how the show plays this idea out, and if it's anything like the games, we'll all be left with so much more to ponder. Thank you for watching this episode of Workshopping Stories Adaptations. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like. Did you spot any other story components in the pilot? If so, let us know in the comments below. We'll be responding to some comments in a Workshopping Stories Discussing Adaptations video and would love to add your input to the discussion. Thanks again for watching.